From Luminary, this is Therapy versus the World. I'm your host, Joe Nucci. I'm a licensed psychotherapist, and together, with the help of our very special guests, we are going to arm you with mental health knowledge that will help you tackle the emotionally difficult aspects of your lives. We will break down pop psychology terms and constructs like narcissism, trauma, self-esteem, relationships, and more. Hopefully, you will leave each episode understanding yourself and others a little bit better. Today, we are talking to Jimmy DeCicco, an entrepreneur and athlete, the founder of the brand Super Coffee. Jimmy, I'm really excited to talk to you.
Joe, it's great to be here, man. Thanks for having me on.
So the reason I wanted to talk to you and have you on this podcast is I want to explore mental health in the context of athleticism, of entrepreneurship, and high performance. Super Coffee, for those of you who don't know, I actually had some today before I shot, is the third largest bottled coffee in America, right behind Starbucks and Dunkin'. It's valued at $500 million, and he has removed, or Super Coffee has removed, over 25 million pounds of sugar from the American diet, which is all just very impressive. I'd love to hear just a little bit, for those who are unfamiliar, I'd love to hear about your story, how this came to be, and I'm ready to listen.
Yeah. So Super Coffee started in 2015. It was me and my two little brothers. We all played sports in college. We were collegiate athletes, and we did not want to drink a Starbucks Frappuccino that was loaded with 46 grams of sugar and 300 calories, and as student athletes, we were tired. We needed energy, and we wanted that energy to be good for us. So my younger brother turned to a blender in his dorm room and added protein into 2 cups of coffee and MCT oils, just healthy fat for fuel. Instead of sugar, he sweetened it with things like monk fruit and stevia. And he made a product that tasted good, was good for him, and enhanced with functional benefits rather than negatives like sugar, calories, cream, that type of thing. And he started selling it to his teammates and his classmates and his coaches. And before long, he called me and my middle brother and said, "Guys, I'm dropping out of school to start a coffee company. People love this stuff. There's nothing out there like it. I need to go all in on this. I'm right about this one, and I'm just getting your blessing." And I think the instinctual big brother in me kicked in. I was like, "Well, you can't do this alone. So let me help you get started, and then I'll get back to reality." Here we are, 8.5 years later, still building a business together.
All right, very cool. So it's a family business.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. I once had a supervisor say that office dysfunction can sometimes mirror familial dysfunction, even if you're not working in a family business. I'm just kind of curious what you think about that, not just from your own experience, but from what you've seen with other friends who are entrepreneurs or working in corporate America.
Yeah, look, I think the lines blur because this doesn't feel like a job. This truly is our lives and our lifestyles. And I think there needs to be an intentional level of professionalism when we are working with others. And my brothers and I, early on, we realized that we could not treat each other like brothers. We used to resolve disagreements in the backyard with fist fights and wrestling and cursing and rematches and one-on-one on the basketball court. And that type of behavior, that type of reactionary behavior just was not productive. So we've set up a structure in which we can give each other feedback without getting defensive. We're very clear on who's responsible for what and what the expectation is for each of us. I think that was critical. And for any founder or co-founders out there, really establishing that accountability and those roles and responsibilities is important. And putting it on paper and speaking it out into the world, because if expectations are unclear, that's the gray area where tension is really created.
I'm really curious to know a little bit about the ups and downs of the entrepreneurial journey since college, basically. How has it been? Has it been, mostly everything is up from here? Has it been very stressful? Have you felt like quitting sometimes? Isn't the stat something like over 90% of businesses fail? Yours is continues to be really successful. I'm wondering what it's been like for you internally, emotionally.
Yeah. And I think there's ups and downs throughout the course of a day, sometimes throughout the course of an hour. And then certainly you can see those trends over months and over years. So it's very difficult to not get too high or not get too low. You really I love the saying that nothing is ever as good or as bad as it seems. So trying to remain pretty stoic and level-headed throughout is an intentional practice, because one day you can be out in a store getting feedback, oh, this is the best product I've ever tried, and you break a sales record, and then you go raise money from an investor. The next day, somebody tells you the product's not good, and then you're running out of money before you have to make payroll again, and sales aren't where they need to be, and you're burning more cash than you're supposed to. And you need something good to happen. And then something good does happen. You get into Walmart or you get into Whole Foods, and you raise more money from new investors. And I think that's kind of been this journey. And as soon as you get momentum, something inevitably goes wrong, and you just have to be prepared for that. That's part of life and part of the entrepreneurial journey for sure.
Yeah, it's something that I think a lot about, both in my clinical practice and in my content creation. I don't usually think of it as stoicism. I think of it as thick skin. But either way, it's more about things can be good and things can be bad, or they can just be what they are.
Yeah, they are what you label them, right? I mean, they're neither good nor bad until you say so. And I think it's a tricky thing, because that type of thick-headedness, or in my case, stoicism, sure, it protects you from bad days and allows you to stay on course. But sometimes as a high performer, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs are guilty of this, you get a win and you don't celebrate it. You're just back to work on the next thing. And the goalpost just keeps moving. Like you said at the beginning, $500 million valuation. When we first started this thing, $100 million valuation was impossible. That was beyond our wildest dreams. And once you get there, once you achieve those milestones, it's not like we throw a big party and we hug. We express gratitude every day, but it's like, okay, we're at 100. How do we get to 200? And it's sort of a toxic thing where if you're only playing to win the Super Bowl, after that Super Bowl is won, you're going to feel pretty depressed and down. Like that thing that you've been building up towards is gone. So you got to find a way to fall in love with the work. And I'm still working on that.
It's something that I think a lot of people intellectually understand, celebrating wins, having gratitude. It makes sense. But when you're in the experience of it, and I'm certainly guilty of that too, it's not necessarily something you always follow through on. What do you think the cost is of not celebrating, of moving the goalposts again and again? Why is that bad for business or for mental health?
I think it certainly leads to burnout is probably the superficial answer. Going a layer deeper, camaraderie, company culture, motivation, all relies on that. Sure, people show up for different incentives, whether that's a paycheck to pay their bills, bonus potential stock options, and the future value of what they can be worth. All of that comes with building a better business and scaling an organization. But if you're not celebrating wins, the people who are there to feel a part of something bigger and feel that they're contributing to those wins, if they don't feel appreciated or respected along that journey, and if it's just constantly go, 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 that's not for everybody. And I don't think it's sustainable for very long.
Yeah, it makes me think of this book that's actually about stock trading, I believe, or investments, but it's called The Hour When Dog Becomes Wolf or something like that. Are you familiar?
I haven't seen that one.
Basically, it was a stockbroker or something like that, and he ended up becoming a neuroscientist who studied risk and reward and found that there were actually, I believe, he found that there were measurable brain changes, or at the very least behavioral changes that you see in like a gambling addict's brain with people who deal with really high numbers and are making really, really big bets, and whether or not you're actually going and trading like he did in a career, or if you're just building a business, there is this element of risk and reward. You mentioned highs and lows earlier, and it made me think moving goalposts. Oh, interesting. I wonder if it's kind of has to do with that intensity seeking like behavior that you sometimes see.
Yeah, totally. And there's a transformation in when you bring an idea to life that is very high risk, very high reward. It's thrilling, it's exhilarating, it's adrenaline, it gets the adrenaline pumping. But then once that reality and that business that you've created becomes a real entity and an enterprise, and you have 50 employees, 100 employees, 150 employees, then it's a lot less risk and reward and a lot more calculated, sort of mechanistic. Every day is like just cog in the wheel type thing. I mean, let me put it to you this way. I think entrepreneurs love the big hit, whether it's closing an investment round and getting the headline, or closing a big sale, or hiring a big employee, or launching a new product. Those are the big things. And those happen once a year, maybe twice a year. Yeah. But every single day, you need to stock the shelves. You need to pour samples. Right. You need to send the invoices, right? You need to follow up with emails. And that is the minutia that I think there's a difference between executives and entrepreneurs. Think what gets businesses off the ground may not be the same skill set that allows businesses to endure long after the entrepreneur is gone.
Right. Well, entrepreneurship, it blew my mind. I was in grad school and someone described entrepreneurship as a fundamentally creative profession, which makes sense because you're creating a business. But in terms of the common vernacular, I think most people associate creatives with something like artists or musicians. And the interesting thing I've noticed, whether it's my entrepreneurial friends or my more artistic friends, is really great creative talent doesn't necessarily translate into that success or into that profit. I live in New York City, and sometimes I'll be walking through Gallery Town and you meet different artists, and there's some who, regardless of how talented they are, there's some who you can tell has that business stint. They're selling to a certain market and they produce a lot of art of a certain type to appeal to a certain kind of buyer. My guess, I don't know, I'm not really involved in the art world. My guess is that those artists are probably making returns on their creativity. And it's a little bit more like the day in, day out hustle that you kind of describe. And I think it's easier to sometimes think about it when you think about something like art or music, but maybe people will push back on that. I don't know. But sometimes I think that the creative aspect gets lost when it's a business, even though that's not the whole picture.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's an interesting piece because some of the most creative people I know are independent individual contributors. They're like my buddy Devin, who you see on Instagram. He is one of the best creators I've ever met. And this dude has so much energy and such an ability to turn things into reality. But for him to build a business, that's not what he's motivated by. That's not like, he doesn't want to be a CEO that leads 100 people every single day. And I think there's a certain level of politics and drama and structure that comes with building these machines. And a business truly is a machine. And at a certain point, that artist needs to recognize where his or her strengths are within that machine. I heard something recently the other day too, that because I've been thinking about creativity a lot lately. And it says, inner peace is the new rich. And I don't think you can be creative without some type of stillness or calmness or tranquility, because for the last several years, my day to day has been wake up, respond to emails, get the work done, put out the fire, go raise the money, go hit the next thing. There's always something to be done. And when you're in that rat race, you don't have the ability to sit down and think and be creative.
I've learned a lot about the psychology of creativity, and one of the better distinctions I've picked up is that creative inspiration often happens in a transition, which is why the joke is like you have great ideas as soon as you get into the shower or when you're walking to the laundry room or whatever it is. And when you don't have room to let your mind wander during a transition, when you're not taking that break, when it's just one thing to the other, next thing, it does make sense why you're getting less downloads. People used to talk about in terms of muses speaking to them. I identify as a creative person. A lot of my ideas for my content, people ask me all the time. I wish I could tell them. They often just come to me, but they're often coming to me when I'm walking out the door or when I'm getting in a taxi or whatever it is. And so I have a notepad on my phone, but it's very, very difficult to manufacture that. I've found, at least, like sitting down and saying, okay, I'm going to brainstorm content for an hour. It doesn't seem to work. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it does. That's an interesting take. But even what you just said there, you have a notepad on your phone. That's part of the process and the structure that you've created, right? Because think about how many great ideas are fleeting, or how many people have great ideas, but not the ability to execute on them. Everybody's got ideas to start companies. Very few people do. Nor very people, nor should they. It's a difficult thing. It's not for everybody. I would not recommend this life for everybody. So yeah, the creativity and transition is an interesting concept, and I guess the question is, how do you create more transitions for yourself? Is that journaling? Is that meditating? Is it going for walks or runs? To create that space in your day to have that time to think.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit more about that. I'd love to integrate more of the mental health conversation into your journey. Something you said earlier when you were talking about moving the goalpost, it had me thinking about if someone's sitting in front of me and I'm assessing how dysfunctional or how problematic a pattern is, a behavioral one. So this could be gambling, pornography, exercise, and eating disorder, really anything. We call these process addictions or behavioral addictions. What we're often looking for is, are they engaged in the behavior to run away from a negative emotion or an unpleasant emotion? Or are they engaged in it to chase a positive emotion? So for an example, with exercise, if I go to the gym every morning because I feel good for the rest of the day and I love endorphins and I respect my vessel and I know that it's also good for my mental health and I'm chasing all these positive things, okay. But if I go to the gym because if I don't, I'm going to feel so guilty for consuming calories, that's when we might start getting concerned. And I wanted to share it with you because this idea of moving goalposts, it hadn't really occurred to me before, but I wonder how much of the up and downs of entrepreneurship or high performance or that goalpost moving, how might you articulate it with that psychological truism in mind that running away from something unpleasant is very different from trying to achieve something or attain something pleasant or positive?
Yeah, it's a good push. I think it's a sickness of like not having enough or not being enough. It might be a self-worth conversation where it's like, okay, we got to 100 million, let's get to 200, right? We got to 200 million. When will it be enough? And like, God forbid you get to a 500 million valuation, a recession hits, then all of a sudden your company's worth 250 million. You built a $250 million company from a dorm room, but you feel like a loser because at one point you were at 500, right? So like, I think you lose the appreciation and the perspective of what you're building along the way because it's never enough. I don't know if it's exactly running from something. It's probably more related to running away from bad feelings than pursuing good ones. But everybody just wants bigger and faster and more. And I think that we're hardwired to pursue that.
Yeah. Well, from a cognitive behavioral perspective, you could also think about it in terms of sensitization and desensitization. So one of the things you do when someone comes into therapy, if let's say they're discussing a trauma that happened to them and it's too overwhelming, they can't even let themselves think about it, let alone talk about it out loud, you slowly over time desensitize them. So thinking about it, then talking about it, and then ultimately processing it isn't quite as overwhelming. It's one of the reasons actually why ketamine therapy has had a moment over the last couple of years, because ketamine dissociates you from your body. And then those feelings aren't quite as intense. You're not quite as sensitive to them. On the flip side, if you're working with someone who, let's say you're someone who keeps on dating aggressive men. You had an aggressive man in your life growing up. There's the unconscious attraction lens of it. That's the more Freudian analysis. But another way to work with that person in therapy is help resensitize them to, those little red flags of behavior, those little yellow flags you see in the beginning. You don't notice them because you're used to it because of your upbringing, but let's help you notice them. And then you're not going to get into these relationships anymore. So there's desensitization and resensitization. I wonder how that might be applied to someone who keeps on moving the goalpost. And I'm only thinking about it out loud just now in this moment for myself, because even with the content, the first time I got 50,000 views on a post, I was ecstatic. It was like a high in a lot of ways. And now it's like expected. Like if it doesn't get that many views, and sometimes the algorithm, just for whatever reason, it's just not in your favor and you post it again later and then it does really well. So it actually has nothing to do with the work a lot of times. And so all that to say is I'm wondering how you might think about it in terms of sensitizing yourself to, would you say it's like to gratitude for where you are, to feeling accomplished, to feeling successful? What would it be?
Yeah, I think going back to what I said earlier is like, you have to love the work, and if you're only building towards a finish line or an end zone or a goalpost, or like that big moment at the end of it, I think you will be disappointed. And so I think falling in love with the day to day and being happy with the effort that you put in, is why people have, we call it marathon blues. After somebody runs a marathon for the next few days, granted they physically exerted themselves, but months and months of training are now done. You're going to be sad. You're going to be depressed. So I think falling in love with the routine, falling in love with the work, and then anything after that is icing on the cake. Meaning, you sell your company and you make $100 million. That's a good thing. That shouldn't be the thing. That's a benefit of the work. And it's why you say, like, you hear amazing people say, like, if you love what you do, you don't work a day in your life. That's kind of what I'm talking about, like falling in love with that journey. And then anything that sort of authentic expression of your work creates is just a benefit, not the end goal.
Based on what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm kind of picking up on, you feel like mental health and high achievement are intertwined, or do you feel like they're sometimes at odds with each other? Because it sounds like what you're saying is it's given you perseverance and an edge to have that gratitude and to have that mindfulness. Yeah.
I don't think they're at odds. I think that they, if neglected, they can be at odds. You can be in this constant pursuit of something, of more sales, more revenue, more investors. But if you don't have a healthy routine and a healthy perspective during that pursuit, it becomes toxic very quickly. So I think setting up things for yourself, whether it's fitness, whether it's running, whether it's cold plunges, going for a walk, whatever it is for you, I think having that routine or that person in your life that can sort of ground you and help you enjoy the journey makes all the hard days a lot better.
It reminds me of conversations we've had in grad school for helping professions. It's not just psychotherapists, but nurses and doctors also think about this. It's this idea of self-care, which personally I often find the label a little bit funny, because people will talk about eating right and exercise and getting a proper amount of sleep as self-care, when arguably these are basic things you need to function or at least perform your best. Someone could be listening to this and they could be thinking to themselves, yeah, but at the end of the day, work is work, output is output. And if I need to sleep a little less to achieve that output, then that's actually what I'm going to do. How do you think about that conceptually in terms of the structures you talk about?
Yeah, I think there's truth in that, right? There's certainly always exceptions, but those need to be just that. They need to be exceptions. It can't be the rule, and there's a lot of science about how much rest we need, how much fuel we need, what we need, like the fuel we need to perform at a certain level, whether you're running a marathon or running a company, like that requires certain things in order for you to show up at your best. Otherwise, you're going to be sick, you're going to be tired, you're going to be unhealthy. But yeah, if you're crunching towards a deadline, or if you have a goal to meet and that goal requires that you pull an all-nighter every once in a while, you step up and do that, and then you recover for the next couple of days.
I'd say a few more things about how you find the exception. In my practice and in my life, people who struggle with burnout, for example, I don't think they actually know when to pick what the times are exceptions and when's not. Is it internally discerned, where it's more about how you're feeling, how tired you actually are, how much input you can do, or the circumstance, what actually needs to get accomplished? How do you think about that for yourself or for your team?
Yeah, I think the work will always be there, and the work stops when you stop. Any entrepreneur can make an exception that I need to pull an all-nighter tonight because I have 100 emails that I didn't get to. 80 of those emails require action from me. 10 of those emails require deep work that I need to actually get into. In order for me to finish all of that before my vacation this weekend, I need to do that. Or it's like, you got through the pile of work today, and then that's enough. You go home, you do your workouts, you get dinner with your wife or boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever, and then you go to bed, you get your 8 hours, and you come back to that pile of work the next day. You can't let that work control your life, and you can't be reactive to that work. So I do like this notion that the work stops when you stop. I think there's this thing called the Eisenhower, I think it's called the Eisenhower matrix, but it's basically a chart with 4 squares, and it's urgency and priority. So you're going to have topics, you're going to have priorities that come up throughout the day. Some are going to be urgent and some are going to be, let me explain this better. The axis is urgent and priority, or not urgent, not a priority. Okay. Things that are not urgent and not a priority, you don't worry about them.
Yeah.
The reason this matrix exists is because a lot of people only attack the urgent priorities, the urgent things first, even if they're not a priority. You get an email, I need this right away. I need this right away. If you're only responding to urgent things, you're not going to be able to put the work in on those priorities. Where I'm going with all of this is you need to be able to distinguish what is urgent, what's not urgent, what's a priority, what's not a priority, because that is how you bring control back to your mental health, back to your life, back to your schedule. And if you're chipping away at those priorities every single day, you're going to be a lot more in control of that pile of work. You're going to know when you have to stop, and you're going to know when you need to put in that extra time. I got a deadline this Friday. I can't miss it. I'm going to be up late tonight, But if you're feeling good, if that deadline's not for 2 weeks, go to bed early, wake up, do your routine. So I think defining the work is important.
All these ideas have been really interesting, really applicable, really valuable, really evocative. And I want to take a little time, get out of our heads, get into our hearts a little bit, and actually invite us both to share what has it been like having to learn these lessons? Where do we still struggle? And I'm wondering if these are things you feel like you've had to learn along the way, if this was guidance that you got, that you're very thankful you implemented from the beginning. What has that been like?
Yeah, it's certainly an evolution. When we started Super Coffee, I was a 22-year-old kid, and I was super insecure. I'd look at other people and be like, wow, I can never be that person. Or I can never do what that person does. And we'd even look up to mentors in the industry and be like, oh my gosh, our business will never be what theirs is. And then you put in the work every single day, you show up, you move small stones, and before long, your business is bigger than your mentor's business, right? Or you've achieved things far greater than what those people you used to look up to achieve. And I think along that process, not only do you gain confidence and those insecurities start to fade away, that they're certainly always there. Like imposter syndrome is always a real thing for me, at least personally. But along the way, you pick up routines, you pick up tips, you pick up tricks, whether it's from podcasts, whether it's from mentors, reading books, and it could be meditation, transcendental meditation. It can be working out. It can be calendar blocking. I did the most profound thing I've done so far in 2024. Granted, we're only 2 weeks in, is I allow myself on Tuesdays and Thursdays to work out at 12 p.m., which is crazy for me. Like I could never think of that. If I wanted to work out, I always had to wake up early against my own will, fight through the alarm clock, struggle downstairs, and then hustle into the office by 7, and that. So I think to create that space for yourself certainly comes with maturity. I don't think I would have been able to do that as a 22 or 23-year-old. But it also comes with recognizing what you need to perform at your best. And looking at others who have built those successful systems, what tips, tricks, routines work for you, and everybody's different. But if I can adopt one thing out of 10 that my mentor does, that might make all the difference for me personally.
So the thought when you were 22 was something like, I could never do fill in the blank, but it sounds like the behavior that followed that was not, so I might as well not even try, but can I do 1/10? And it sounds like you kind of incrementalized it out for yourself until you even sometimes surpassed the people who were mentoring you.
Yeah, it's small wins daily, right? And you have to show up consistently and you have to do the work daily. I was saying earlier, like you have to stock the shelves, every single day. You're not going to close a Series C round of financing every day, but your products in our industry, our coffee needs to be sold to 50,000 stores all over the country every day. And in order to build a business that does 1 million in sales, 2 million, 10 million, 100 million, you need to stock those shelves every damn day. So I think doing that work daily, it has a compounding effect, and you hire your first employee, then you're doing twice as much work. You hire your second employee, you're doing 3 times as much work. So I think staying focused on the foundation and the fundamentals that need to get done in order to build that bigger business and fulfill the vision is critical, because you can't skip the steps.
Yeah. You mentioned before we started recording that therapy has been a big part of your journey. What can you share with the listeners about that? Because people that are, whether they're athletes, entrepreneurs, high performers, coaching is often a very important part of the conversation. And while I criticize coaching content I often see on social media, I'm not anti-coach by any means. I've had coaches that have really, really impacted and helped me, but I'm not often hearing a conversation about therapy in business and mental health in business and entrepreneurship. What's something that you can share that has helped, that you think therapy helped you with in terms of all that we're talking about?
It's a good question. I think before I started doing therapy, I started in September of 2020. So it's been 3.5 years. Every Monday for 3.5 years, I'd see a therapist for 45 minutes. He's awesome, older guy. He works with a lot of CEOs. And my notion for therapy is that I'd uncover, discuss some childhood trauma that I was unaware of. And then all of a sudden I'd have this big, dramatic breakthrough, this emotional breakthrough, and then I'd be a new man. All the problems that I felt before therapy would go away once I made this discovery within therapy. And I don't know I'm sure you do know this. That's not the case for most people, right? That certainly wasn't the case for me. And however, it has been invaluable to me because it helps with perspective of not only hey, am I doing the right things? Here's what I'm struggling with, whether it's ego or self-confidence or positivity or whatever. I have very real, how I benefit from my therapist or with my therapist is having discussing real life examples with him. Hey, I have this problem at work with one of my board members. I have this problem with one of my coworkers. And what therapy has been helpful for me on is not just working on my issues, but understanding who I'm dealing with, and I'm starting to pick up traits. And you mentioned narcissism earlier. People who are narcissists are often high ego, low self-awareness, right? And if I can work with my therapist on different traits, recognizing different traits or themes or characteristics of this type of person, it allows me to deal with them in a more sophisticated way or a more elegant way, and rather than being frustrated on why is this person not like me, or why is this person not doing what I want him or her to do, or what does this person want from me, and how can I be better in that relationship? So therapy has really helped me from a perspective setting exercise, recognize the people I'm working with, who I'm dealing with, and how to most effectively work with them, if that makes sense. I know that's sort of high level, but I'm happy to go deeper on any of it.
Yeah. Could you give, there's so much I want to reply to with that. Could you give a more tangible example of maybe something you didn't understand and then you did end up understanding, or maybe a behavior was changed, a different way you went about interacting with a certain person?
I'll give an example about me personally, where I think high performers often have this trait where they focus on everything they're not rather than everything they are. And it's actually a trait that undermines all that they've built, and I still have a lot of insecurities today as a 31-year-old who's been doing this for 9 years. And those insecurities are, I'm not good at XYZ. I'm not qualified for this. I don't believe in myself. And sometimes my therapist is like, dude, look at everything you just did, right? Look at what you are good at. Look at what you're great at. You're not giving yourself enough credit. And I think that perspective is important, because of all the great things that we do as a business, let's say 90% of the stuff we do here is great and awesome. 90% of my attention goes to that 10% that needs to be better and needs to be improved. So I think having those conversations of like, Rick, man, I just don't have it. Rick, my therapist, Rick, I just don't got it today. You know, like I'm not the guy to do this. And he's like, whoa, slow down. Let's look at the facts, right? Let's look at the data. Let's look at everything you've been through to see if what you're saying right now is true or false.
Yeah. I really, really love that. The people often focus on what they are not what they are currently. It goes back to the goalpost that we've been talking about. It also, for me, brings up what maybe is, broadly speaking, could be a really not just important difference between therapy and coaching, but an argument for needing both of them, or at the very least, needing both styles in your therapist or in your coach, which is a lot of times what we're doing in therapy, a lot of what we might call mental pathology is often stemmed from people not accepting, not feeling what they need to feel, not talking about the situation as it is. Essentially, whether they're in denial or they're minimizing or they're suppressing, they are not accepting what is so. And therapy can be so powerful because you have this person who's sitting in front of you. Most therapists are have a very compassionate temperament. And we're sitting here and we're saying, of course it's like that. You know, like more often than not, that's what I'm doing with my patients. And that's actually what's curative, because there's something very honest about it, versus maybe a way people use coaching. It's kind of like, this is who you could be, you know, and it kind of, I don't want to speak about it in gender terms, but if you think about it in terms of like the masculine father who pushes their child to be better versus kind of like the nurturing mother being like, but this is what is so right now, then together, that's why you need both of those energies. And like I just said, I think you can have both of those energies in the same helper, whether it's a therapist or a coach. I know I show up in different ways for my patients at different times, but I think that's really, really powerful.
Yeah. And sometimes I'll use my therapist as a coach where I play back real life business challenges with him. And he may address them from a psychological perspective or a therapist's perspective. And here's what's really going on. Listen to what you're saying. Let's be intentional with your words, you know. And then a coach is more so like, how do you handle elegant conflict in the office? How do you deliver uncomfortable feedback to an underperforming employee? And there's certainly psychology in that as well, you know, stuff that's inarguable, but that's more learning the process and learning the systems. You know, for instance, delivering feedback. This is something I learned from my coach. We have an executive coach, my brothers and I, in addition to the therapist. We have a lot of help. We need a lot of help. And the executive coach, when delivering feedback to an employee, which every manager needs to do, or having an uncomfortable conversation with your friend or partner or family member, he taught us this communication wheel where it starts with the data, like, and that data could be, hey, Joe, I noticed that you were 15 minutes late to that call yesterday. Then it moves into your reaction or emotion to that, you know, like your judgment of that, which is that made me feel disappointed or sad or annoyed that you didn't care about that meeting the same way that we did. Right. And so those two things were tied together, emotion and judgment. And then it goes into what you want, like the action that you want to take. Like, I want you to be bought in. You're a freaking talented employee. I need you to be better and be on time and XYZ, whatever it is that you're trying to fix. And then finally, what are you willing to do? What am I willing to do to help you? I'm willing to show up to the meeting 5 minutes early and help you prep. So we're both in this thing together. Right. So like when you break down something like the discomfort of giving feedback into a 4-step process that is like pretty applicable to any situation, it just gives you a tool in your tool belt to be a better manager. Right. And then before long, you start hitting people with the communication wheel and you don't even know you're using the communication wheel.
Yeah. I think, I feel, I want, here's how I'm going to help you.
That's it. You nailed it. You said it way better than I did.
Yeah. Well, it's actually analogous to a DBT skill, but it's a spin off of it. The way I learned it is it doesn't end with, here's how I'm going to help you. It ends with basically like a boundary setting. So it's something I can so vividly remember it in the textbook. It's something, if you have a hard time asserting yourself, let's say with a neighbor who's playing loud music, I think is the example in the book. It says, I think you've played music past 11 p.m. every night this week. It's really stressing me out. I feel very stressed by this because I have to get up early for work. I want you to respect the quiet hours. And I always thought it was so funny because I think in the book it calls it like a self-care solution. But then the example they give is if you cannot manage that, I can always contact the police and they can help you turn down the music. And I'm just like, I've never met a patient who needs assertiveness training who's willing to call the cops over music. But
totally,
that's the example in the DBT manual. Mm-hmm.
Totally. That's funny.
Yeah. I'm really present to how important humility is, not just to your success and achievement, but also your, is it fair to say your leadership style?
I think so. I think there's a fine line between humility and insecurity, which is interesting. I also think that from a coaching perspective, a great leader takes all of the blame and none of the credit. I think you have to empower your employees to build and create and win with you, give them the tools they need, the support they need. And from a humility perspective, I do truly come from the place of, we're just getting started. I feel like I haven't done anything yet. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that's humility or some sort of toxic insecurity that's deep down. Yeah. And I don't know. I mean, can you say more about that, of like that line between insecurity and humility?
Yeah, I think insecurity is more of an energy of I can't, I don't have it, I will never have it. And humility is more like I don't know how, I haven't figured it out yet. There's almost an empowerment with humility, or it can also be, you were speaking about different people have different strengths. It can be, this isn't my role. This isn't my gift. Like whatever it is. I think, you mentioned earlier, like, we all need a lot of help. I think it's easy to see someone who's very, very successful and accomplished, and then say, oh, wow, they're so competent. They have it figured out. But in a way that's actually very unfair to the person in question. It almost idealizes them to an unfair point, because I certainly have a lot of help. And I certainly have kind of felt that tension where it's like people think I'm really, like, whatever it is, fill in the blank, like really successful or really this, or, even like with my content, it's like, no, I have help, I've employed people to help me, or I feel lucky and blessed to have people who are willing to get on the phone with me to talk through strategy, to help me think about a problem, to look at something a different way. It is not all me. We all need lots of people. And I bring that back to your question and say, maybe there's also an element of that in humility. There's something more about teamwork, or being willing to not do it all on yourself. Not doing that starts to feel like there's more ego involved and insecurity, as you've termed it.
Yeah, no, it's a great distinction what you just said, and I think leaders are never stuck. Right, to your point, I haven't figured it out yet. When an investor asks us, and this is sort of more of a stoic principle of like, where are we at on this problem? We're working on it. We're getting there. We're making progress. When an obstacle shows up, we work twice as hard at it. It's never an excuse. It's never an I can't. So to that point, to the distinction you made, there's no insecurities that I can't, I'm not capable, none of that. It is, I'm still learning. I'm still getting the skill set, and I'm never stuck. Like, give me a couple more days and I'll figure that shit out.
Something that we haven't touched on yet, and I want to make sure we do before we wrap up, is not just your dedication to health and athleticism, but also your company's, your brand. I remember you once told me that so your coffee has a lot of protein. It was invented, or kind of conceptualized, if you will, by an athlete. And I know a big part of your marketing and your consumer base is actually like, marathoners, triathletes, and stuff like that. Could you I'm just curious to hear a little bit about that, how you think about that for people who don't know. And B, can you tie that into some of the other stuff we've talked about today, particularly around, humility, asking for help, getting better?
I think I can tie that in. I think so. So I think that first and foremost, a brand is an extension of the people who work there, right? And the culture. I always say it'd be weird if like we bottled our mom's salad dressing, like that's just not, we're not high, like we are high energy guys. Like Super Coffee is an embodiment of me and my brothers, so I think authentically this brand makes sense for who we are. I think we identified that there were a lot of people out there that are like us, that are driven, they're ambitious, they want to be better, they want to do better. And it's the same community that is getting in cold plunges and running marathons and going to saunas and going to retreats and investing in coaches and therapists and summits. Like there's this whole community that wants the most out of every day. I think what we learned later on in the company's history, like within the last year or two, is that community is a lot smaller than we thought, right? Like, and to be successful in the beverage industry, you need to sell hundreds of millions of bottles. And in order to do that, there's only 400 million people or something like that in America. You need a product that has a universal appeal. For those who want more out of their day, we're giving you a coffee that helps you achieve that. We say we remove the negatives and we add the positives,
right? Literally
from the ingredients that we put in and take out to the message that we're putting out into the world. And the content, the people, the customers, it all flows. We don't do marketing at EDM music festivals. We do marketing at marathon expos. And we do partnerships with fitness influencers, not celebrity singers or dancers. Not that there's anything wrong with either of those things, but I think as we build our brand, we're targeting a community that is seeking the same things that we seek or we sought from the beginning.
Yeah.
I think that was just the first part of your question.
So how are you going to, or how have you been is maybe the better way to ask the question. How have you been broadening that scope?
So really taking the science and the technical component out of the marketing. We have two products. We have our core Super Coffee bottle, 70 calories, 0 sugar. It's a latte, does really well in grocery stores with a female audience. You put that in a gas station in Arkansas, and Bubba, the dude who's shopping that gas station, reads 70 calories. He says, I'm not drinking that. That's not going to taste good. So we just launched a new product for gas stations called Super Coffee Extra. This is not an ad. This is an interesting distinction. Yeah. This is still 0 grams added sugar. It's half the calories of a Java Monster. But our messaging is not low calorie, low sugar. It is, this tastes great and it's going to give you energy, right? Yeah. So we've sort of repositioned that marketing to broaden that audience. And we're just leaning in towards taste. Like very few people will make sacrifices. And you and I both know a lot of people who will take any product if it's going to make them feel better, no matter how badly it tastes. Very few people on their way to work in the morning will consume something that doesn't taste good. So even though we're better for you, we need to taste as good as the thing that has 45 grams of sugar in it.
What was that transition like for you? Understanding that, I want to, I moved the goalpost. I want to be able to sell to this kind of community. I want to sell this more many bottles. I don't know exactly what it was for you. Maybe you can share. What was that like for you? Was it an easy switch? Did you have to swallow a humility pill? I'm curious as we kind of wrap up here. What was that internal experience like? Because when so much of your initial success is built one way, I deal with this with patients all the time. A certain style of therapy is so great for like the first year, let's say. And then this other problem comes up and it's like, I can't be as empathically confrontational with them anymore. Like, what am I going to do? I know it's really easy for me to make it wrong or start making stuff up about myself or them or whatever it is. I'm curious what that was like for you in this example.
I think it was a humbling discovery to learn that our products did not have a universal appeal. And it's a risk. It's a watch out for entrepreneurs everywhere, where you have to get outside of your echo chambers. You have to get outside of your loyalists and your friends and family who tell you you're great. And you really don't know it until you get into multiple communities in multiple parts of the country. Like it's easy to win in a city a region, an entire coast of the country. But what we've learned, like energy drinks, for instance, brands like Celsius and Ghost and C4 call that performance energy, zero sugar, functional energy. That's only 30% of the energy drink category. Diet sodas, only 30% of the soda category. That means that 70% of the world is still buying full sugar, full calorie energy drinks and sodas. So for us, I think the distinction or the discovery we learned was our core products only appeal to 30% of people who are looking for that better for you alternative. So sure, it was humbling to admit that, to admit that our products couldn't be universal the same way that the Starbucks Frappuccino is. And we immediately went into problem solving mode of how do we reach those people without sacrificing or compromising what our brand is and what we stand for.
For me, it brings up this idea of integration. In psychotherapy, it's not black or white. It's not, I'm going to stop being this way and I'm going to start being more that way. In fact, I don't know how to transform somebody like that so holistically, and I'm not totally sure any other therapist does either. It's more, how can we make these adjustments so you can fit in this new aspect, add in a layer of complexity? And it sounds like you did that very well. Unfortunately, we're all out of time. And there's so many other directions that I want to go in. And so we'll have to have you on again in the future. Thank you for coming. How can people learn more about Super Coffee or more about you? Where can they find you?
Yeah, on Instagram is probably the best spot. We are at Drink Super Coffee. My brothers and I are making a bunch of content for that page. So check it out and follow us from there.
Yeah, definitely. I really, really like all of your content. Thank you again for coming.
Joe, thanks, brother. This was awesome.
And if you're listening and you liked this episode, please subscribe on Spotify or YouTube. It is one of the easiest ways to support us. And remember, Therapy versus the World episodes are available early and ad-free when you subscribe to Luminary.